Gentlemen, and you're very welcome to tonight's joint collaboration between Carlow Historical and Archaeological Society and Laois Heritage Society. Again, this is a new venture for both of us, and we're very, very lucky to have a really good lecture tonight on a subject near and dear to Carlow hearts as it is to Laois hearts. Just before we get into the lecture, to say that for the Carlow Archaeological Society, this is a kind of a very important year. On the 1st of May 1946, which is this weekend's 75th anniversary, we had our very first lecture. So it's our 75th year and things like that. From a Laois Heritage point of view, the collaboration we had on the lecture earlier in the month went very well, and we're really looking forward to tonight. If you're not a member of either society, can I appeal to you? Please support your local history society. Both societies work hard at promoting their heritage and historic and archaeological stuff in each of their counties. And, you know, it's well worthwhile joining either society. If you're in County Laois, you can find details on laoisheritage.ie, and if you're in County Carlow, you can join on carlowhistorical.com. And if you happen to be in Great Cullen, you can join both. I think that's the easiest way of putting it to keep everyone happy. So I think, without further ado, I'll hand over to Sean Murray, who is president of Laois Heritage, who's also given the talk tonight. So Sean, if you want to take it from there.
That's great. Thanks very much, Warwick. Thanks for that very kind introduction. My name is Sean Murray, and many thanks for joining us here this evening on this joint venture between Laois Heritage Society and Carlow Historical and Archaeological Society, extending the virtual hand across the Bairrche to meet at Killeshin, which we hopefully will be doing in person soon. This is the final talk in the April series, and we hope perhaps to link up with chats over the summer months. Just a little bit about myself. I'm currently the chairman of the Laois Heritage Society. I also run Laois Archaeology website and the social media platforms that go with that. I have a great passion for history and heritage in County Laois and beyond. I graduated from Sligo IT with a degree in archaeology a good few years ago now, and I also completed a master's in plant biology at UCD. As things open back up, I would encourage anybody in the county who has an interest in heritage to join our society and get involved in some of our community-driven projects, talks and excursions which may be planned over the coming months. So we'll just move on then to the next slide there, John, please.
Can you see that, Sean?
Don't see it there at the moment.
Okay, 1 second, see if maybe it's my... Is that working now?
Yeah, that's it there. Yeah. Thanks, John. Okay. Great stuff. So what we will discuss today, anyway, are basically the origins and the history of the church at Killeshin, a closer look at the architectural features at Killeshin, the significance of Killeshin and the Hiberno-Romanesque doorway. We look at its landscape setting, the associated sites and monuments with Killeshin, and then I suppose we'll have a brief look then at moving forwards towards potential ways of interpreting the site at Killeshin, and then we'll open up for questions and answers. So we go to the next slide again, John.
Oh, sorry. Is that there now, Sean?
Not yet there, no, I don't see it.
Is that okay now? Hello?
Great, thanks, John. Killeshin is regarded as one of the finest examples of Hiberno-Romanesque architecture anywhere in the country. It stands on the Laois-Carlow border in an upland area as one approaches the Slieve Margy Plateau, on its northeastern fringes. A tributary of the River Bairrche called the Flourishes passes by the church to the north, and you'll see a picture of the Flourishes, absolutely glorious, on the slide there that John has just put up. These ruins date to a period in Ireland before the Norman conquest in 1169. A period in Ireland when European culture and the Romanisation of the church was beginning to take root in society and reflect itself into the fabric of our buildings. The oldest extant structure here at Killeshin is the highly ornate Hiberno-Romanesque doorway, a portal which separated the secular world from the sacred sanctuary within the church itself. The church can be dated to the mid-1100s, a generation before the arrival of the Normans. That's great. So just in terms of the place name then, and given the passage of time, I suppose, it can be quite tricky to work out a definitive meaning or origin for the place name, of any place name really, in Ireland. There are several interpretations which may shed some light on the place name of Killeshin. We know the word kill, an anglicised version of kill, is associated with a church site, which isn't surprising here at Killeshin. So we may interpret the name as the Church of the Glen of Usha, Usha being the Irish name for the river Flourishes, which we've seen in the last slide. An alternative theory suggests that Killeshin may also refer to the famous poet Oisin of mythological origins, who was the son of Fionn MacCool, who himself, it is said, was raised in the forests of the nearby Slieve Bloom Mountains. Oisin, the young deer, according to the mythological sources, was raised by his mother Sive, who was cast under a spell by a druid and was turned into a deer, and is said to have raised her son in the hills of Slieve Margy. Now I leave this, both of these up to your own preference. I particularly like the story of Oisin, but who knows for sure how the origin of the place name came. According to George Petrie in 1878, the summit of the hill at Killeshin was known as Knocknara, which may have been an inauguration site for the associated population group known as the Bairrche, who we will see dominated the area in the early medieval period. Knocknara meaning the Hill of the King. However, I have found to find any cartographic evidence for this place name. So if anybody has any suggestions later on, maybe you might like to comment on this. We'll just go to the next slide there, John. Thanks very much. So I suppose we see here a picture of Sleety Monastery, which is located, I think it's about 5 kilometers northeast of Killeshin. And I suppose we see here a granite high cross there in the picture. It's one of 2 granite high crosses in Sleety. So I suppose Christianity arrived in Ireland in the 5th century AD. With the conversion of the High King of Ireland, Laois Mac Murchadha, the Christian communities in Ireland began to flourish in the succeeding years and centuries. At this meeting in Tara, Fiach, a prince of the ancient kingdom of Bairrche, pardon my Irish pronunciation, it mightn't be the best, located today in the modern day barony of Slieve Margy was present. So Fiach was present at this summit between the king and St. Patrick. It is said that Fiach was given the tonsure by St. Patrick and thus ordained to become the first bishop of Leinster. Fiach founded a monastery on the eastern bank of the Bairrche, but following the loss of 40 monks as a result of the plague, he received a vision from Patrick, who advised him to find a place on the west bank of the Bairrche, which would be marked by the presence of a boar, which became known as Sleety or Slavetalk, or the house near the mountains in County Laois. On account of this story, Sleety was perhaps the first church site in the wider area located 5 kilometers to the northeast of Killeshin. Both churches were associated with St. Patrick, which became a huge political issue in Ireland in later centuries to come. Indeed, local folklore in the area suggests that there are subterranean tunnels connecting both sites, although there is no archaeological evidence of this. Both churches are located with the powerful Leinster population group known as I mentioned, as the O'Brien or the Ubria. The area between both these sites would have been close to the ancient Slieve-Dahlia road and today contains early medieval monuments such as ring forts and enclosures. Killeshin was likely founded approximately 2 centuries or so after Sleaty. So just go to the next slide there, John, please. So moving back towards Killeshin, there are several saints associated with Killeshin, according to ancient sources, such as the 9th century martyrology of Angus. Angus, who himself was a Cooley church reformer, he was associated with the monasteries of Coolbanner, Clonina, Dicerlinos in County Laois, and Tala in Dublin. Although we do not have definitive dates for a number of these saints, even from the Annals of Ireland, the first saint and likely founder of the monastery at Killeshin was Mo Diarmuid, or Saint Diarmuid of Glen Ushain, and not surprisingly himself associated with the O'Brien powerhouse in the region. His feast day, according to the martyrology of Angus, is recorded on the 8th of July, but we don't have a year for that. The date on which he died was the 8th of July. Saint Comgan succeeded Diarmuid and is recorded in the same document as Comgan Mac Murchadha, and he died on the 27th of February, with both of these saints likely living in the 7th or the 8th centuries when Killeshin was founded, possibly the 6th. Now we're not really sure. Another saint called Saint Murrigan, Murrigan means seaborn in Irish, is recorded at Killeshin, and his feast day is the 27th of January. Given the site perhaps an international influence, or at least a monk that was born on an island, perhaps off the coast of Ireland. At this point, I will speak a little bit about the Ubriac, who I've mentioned about 4 times already, who were, as we have seen, the main tribal group in the area during the early Christian period. The surnames Tracy and MacGorman stem from this population group. They were a powerful Leinster dynasty who at one point in the 7th century held the kingship of Leinster, which was quite an achievement for them. As we have seen, they are associated with a number of saints from Killeshin and also Sleaty. According to the life of Saint Comgall of Bangor, Cormac Mac Murchadha, Mac Éca Cuina, king of Ubriac, was said to have donated lands at Castle Diarmuid for the famous monastery of another Saint Diarmuid there in the 7th or 8th century. It is also said that he had 3 castles on the Bairrche, one at Carlow and another down near Wexford, at a time when their territory extended from South Kildare all the way down to Wexford. By the mid-9th century, the Ubriac's arch enemies, known as the Ukinsalocks, who were later to be dominated by the Mac Murchadha clan, who Diarmuid Mac Murchadha was descended from, pushed deep into their territory and divided it in 2, whereby the northern half were known as Ubriac Margie, perhaps where the name Slieve Margie originates, and the southern part were known as the Ubriac Tira. The Ubriac Margie, with their territorial heartland at Killeshin and Carlow, bordered the ancient kingdom of Ossory, which from Killeshin is located only 9 kilometers to the ancient boundary of the river Dinan. In 884, the Annals record the death of Trasac Mac Bacon, king of Bairrche Murchadha, lord of the Bairrche, who fought the foreigners or Vikings fiercely. Given the proximity of the Bairrche Murchadha, they had shifting alliances with Ossory, Leinster, other tribes in Leinster, and Munster, which often spilled over into warfare. Given the nature of the internecine conflict in Ireland from the period. In 1013, Brian Boru is said to have camped at Slieve Margy and plundered Leinster, seemingly at the hosting of the Bairrche Murchadha, an alliance seen here in this instance with the Kingdom of Munster, or certainly some tribes from Munster anyway. Such actions, and given their disputes with the rival Leinster group, the Untitled Mac Murchadha, resulted in their bloody expulsion by Diarmuid Mac Murchadha in the mid-12th century, whereby the Bairrche are said to have been given land, not surprisingly, by the King of Munster in the 1140s. In the year 1142 AD, it is stated that Donogh, the son of Hugh MacGorman, Lord of High Bairrche, was slain by Gilpatrick, son of Donogh Fitzpatrick, the McGilpatrick of Lord of Ossory. So it seems they were being attacked on all fronts at the time during their expulsion from the area. If you just move on to the next slide there, John, please. So just a quick little look just to show you the kind of the boundaries, I suppose, in Leinster, on the island of Ireland at the time. I've just put in a small little faint blue circle there. You'll see is roughly where Killeshin is located, on the border there with Ossory and the Kingdom of Leinster. I think this map is from the 9th or 10th century or thereabouts anyway. So you can see even the Kingdom of Munster there isn't too far of a distance really from Killeshin. So it would have been a fairly focal point in the landscape on those borders, probably quite unsettled during the periods of a lot of wars and things back then. Just on the other map there, I've referenced it here from rooteweb.com. You can just see some of the tribal names here in the pre-Norman era. You have the O'Murda of Laois, which many of the Laois people on the call tonight will be well aware of. You have the Umurdaha, the Ukinslak, the Bairrche, the MacGormans, the O'Tooles, and they're all kind of in play here within the Killeshin area, I suppose. The McGilpatricks and the Faughart as well, which were pushed out from Kildare sometime in the 10th century as well. So there's a lot going on really with wars and things back then. We just move on to slide number 8 there, please. So what the Annals of Ireland tell us, I suppose, from the period as well. As I said, I mean, there's very little reference to Killeshin from the earlier period. But the earliest definitive reference we have for Killeshin as a monastic settlement comes from the Annals of the Four Masters in 843 AD, in which it was recorded that Aed of Glenushan died in that year. In 874, we heard of another abbot called Diarmuid who died. That was a different Diarmuid now than the founder. And oftentimes in these kind of smaller churches and even bigger monasteries, you'd find saints taking the name of the founding saint of the monastery. So you could have anywhere up to, you could have 10 Diarmuids maybe associated with Killeshin. And all their names are based on the original founder of the monastery. Killeshin was no stranger to violence and conflicts. And in 917, it is recorded that Mael Maddoch MacDermid of the Ukondala, I'm not sure exactly where the Ukondala is, but Mael Maddoch was a sage and bishop of Leinster, and he was also abbot at Killeshin. but he was slain by the Vikings at the Battle of Cairnfuirtha, which I think is probably somewhere near St. Mullins. It seems that they came up the Bairrche. There's some people argue that it was in Kildare maybe where that battle happened, but there's a big argument for that battle happening in St. Mullins, where the Vikings came up the Bairrche and basically the Kingdom of Leinster kind of tried to attack them and force them back into the river. But that particular abbot, he obviously wasn't the most holy of abbots, because he was fighting on the front line there, it seems. He was slain in 917 fighting the Vikings. A great slaughter of Munster men is recorded at Killeshin in 1024, referring to a battle which may have been fought here in that year. In 1041, the son of Diarmuid Mac Murchadha, High King of Ireland and King of Leinster, and not surprisingly connected with the O'Kinselach, raided Killeshin, burnt its Dartach, or oak oratory. He's recorded as having taken over 700 prisoners from the area, so it must have been quite a large monastery. But this was in revenge for an Ubriac attack and plundering on a place called Fernock Moor, which I think is down near Wexford somewhere. The burning of the Dartach is quite interesting in 1041. As we know that the church was constructed of timber oak in this period, and not of stone or of the stone oratory we see there today. Timber constructed churches were certainly known and were normal practice at the time, pre 11th, 12th century. Again, in 1077, we have a record that the great yew trees of Killeshin were burnt. An event surely worth inclusion in the Annals, given the yew's sacred status under the Brehon laws of Ireland at the time. So quite a bad thing to do for the person that was attacking Killeshin at that particular time. Doesn't mention who it was, but it's quite bad. So we just move on to slide number 9, I think there, John. Yeah, so basically this is a kind of an artist's reconstruction, if you like, of an early Christian monastery at Clones, up the north, up around, it would have been in the Kingdom of Ulster at the time. So what we see here is the stone oratory there, or building, which is quite similar to Killeshin. The pitch on this one is probably a lot higher than the Killeshin one. But we also see a round tower here, and we know that Killeshin had a round tower, and I'll speak a little bit about that later. Unfortunately, it's not there anymore. And you'd often find with these monasteries that were surrounded by a kind of a circular vallum, it's called, and that was like the inner sanctum of where all the ritual practices occurred within the monastery. And then further out from that, then we'd have more kind of secular activities. You might have some blacksmiths and farmers and people living in ring forts in the landscape and that kind of thing. So, I mean, it's a good illustration of how maybe Killeshin would have looked like back in the day. Obviously without the lake there, because there's no lake, but there was a river there, and the field systems and that kind of thing. We just move on to slide 10 there, John. So I've already touched on the 12th century a little. Sorry, I'm just going ahead of myself here, I think.
We've got a little bit of a problem there. I'm going to knock someone off because they're after coming in a few times there. Just hold on for 1 second.
Fine, John, no problem, thanks.
They seem to be gone now. They were on there for a while. Okay.
Okay, thanks for that, John. Okay, so I've already touched on the 12th century a little, but this was certainly a very important time in the history of Killeshin, given given that the portal itself was built in the 12th century, in the mid part of the 12th century. Climatic conditions were favourable in the period, as it was known, that particular climatic period was known as the medieval warm period. And we would have seen increased food production, increased population expansion, and then I suppose the warfare that may have went along with that. I guess, you know, when you have more wealth, people get a bit more greedy, and kings started to fight a little bit more, and hence I suppose that's why Diarmuid Mac Murchadha may have ended up in Wales looking for Norman support to reclaim his kingdom. But anyway, there was major church reforms in the period as well. At the sign of Bairrche in 1111, which may have taken place in County Laois, but there's other theories that it may have taken place in Tipperary. Plans were set in place to align the Celtic Church with Rome and press through with major church reforms, such as the enforcement of celibacy in the church. Believe it or not, the pre-1100s church was rife with priests having kids and priests being married and bishops having children and all the rest of it, all the shenanigans that go with it, and free the churches from secular influences. The delineation of ecclesiastical boundaries, parishes and dioceses were also introduced at the sign of Bairrche. So this is a major change for the church in Ireland. From our area of concern, I suppose, the Diocese of Killeshin was officially demarcated with the election of Donal O'Kelly or O'Kelly as bishop. So Diocese of Lagan, I think, formed in 1111 or shortly thereafter. O'Kelly served as bishop until his death in 1181, when he died. And by that stage, the Normans had arrived, and Norman bishops became the norm for the Diocese of Lagan until the Gaelic revival in 1344, when another O'Kelly bishop in 1344 became the new bishop then. The Book of Leinster was also scribed in the 12th century. It was scribed at Terryglass in Ogville in County Laois by Aed Mac Crimthorne. And Aed Mac Crimthorne was also the tutor of the new King of Leinster, Diarmuid Mac Murchadha. Both the Book of Leinster and the Doorway of Killeshin were both patroned by Diarmuid Mac Murchadha. And funny enough, both the book and the doorway have very similar artistic symbolism associated with them. We'll just move on to the next slide, John. Right, yeah, thanks. So it was around this time that the renowned King of Leinster, Diarmuid Mac Murchadha, steps into the picture, whose invitation to the Anglo-Normans began a new phase in Irish history. Diarmuid was king between 1140 and 1166. He fled from Ireland and returned as king with a retinue of Norman knights from 1169 to 1171. Amongst other endeavours, he commissioned the building of several Romanesque churches and abbeys, which included noteworthy examples at the Cistercian House at Baltinglass, St. Saviour's at Glendalough, and Ferns in County Wexford. Killeshin and possibly Timahoe Round Tower were also patroned by Diarmuid. These were all constructed in his first reign as king, so sometime between 1140 and 1166. Baltinglass was constructed in 1148. After the uprooting of the Bairrche margie, Diarmuid wanted to leave his mark in the area, I suppose. The doorway on the round tower of Timahoe and portal at Killeshin may have been the work of the same stonemason he employed. These new buildings would have boosted his reputation and shown that he was playing an active role in the reorganisation of the church within his kingdom. Romanesque architecture was certainly de rigueur in Ireland in the 12th century. And it really began with the likes of St. Cormac's Chapel down at the Rock of Cashel, which was built between 1127 and 1134. We have other notable examples, such as St. Brendan's Cathedral in Clonfert, which came a little later. So Killeshin kind of falls within the kind of mid area of Romanesque architecture in Ireland. It didn't last too long, maybe about 150 years or thereabouts. Such work undertaken added to the prestigious repository of the local kings and acknowledged their acceptance of pan-European church reform movement, excuse me, which was often perceived as lacking in Ireland during the period. As Killeshin was located on the southwestern frontier of his kingdom, along the border of Austria, monumental undertaking such as the Killeshin portal was perhaps a reminder to both friends and foes alike of the power and prestige of his kingdom. We go to the next slide there. So, on the doorway then, we can see here on this slide, we've got some markings here on below the capitals on the door at Killeshin. So, unfortunately, some of these have faded over the passage of time, but we're kind of lucky enough that some antiquarians from the 18th and 19th century took some rubbings of these carvings. But I suppose, you know, how do we know Diarmuid patron Killeshin, I suppose? Well, it would literally seem that he left his mark on the doorway, or at least the stonemason did. Carved in sandstone, we find the following incomplete inscription: Orit du Diarmuid re Lagan, and it's basically a prayer for Diarmuid, King of Leinster. Another inscription on the doorway reads, Or du Carlow, a prayer to Kelly. And in 1925, Leask, who was a very esteemed archaeologist and historian, suggests that Carlow may have been the name of the stonemason who was commissioned at Killeshin. But in my view, I think that, you know, it'd be unlikely that the mason's name would be inscribed alongside the name of a king on a sacred doorway in such prominence. So therefore, I kind of suggest here maybe that the Carlow in question may refer to Dungalo Carlow, who was the Bishop of Loughlin from 1152 to 1181. And I suppose that falls neatly into the time of Diarmuid Mac Murchadha in his first reign, who reigned until 1166. So it seems as though the doorway was constructed or patroned sometime in the period between 1152 and 1166, when Diarmuid was building all these other Romanesque churches in Leinster. Furthermore, it is believed that Dungal O'Callagh was aided by Diarmuid in obtaining the office at the Diocese of Loughlin during the period. And again, this particular O'Callagh or O'Kelly, he would have been of origins from the Kingdom of Austria. There would have been a local, now there is O'Kelly's in Laois as well, but this particular O'Kelly is associated with the Kingdom of Austria, and he became Bishop of Loughlin. So we just move on to the next slide there, John. So just looking at the doorway then itself, we've got two images here, I suppose. We have Leask's 1925 image here on the left, which is a really great illustration to have. I mean, today the doorway does not look like that. I mean, it's what, 95 years ago. So it's great to have these illustrations on the drawing here from 1925. And the drawing on the right then is it's an aerial shot taken from a drone with thanks to Turlough O'Brien, who actually sent me this image. I suppose of the surviving Romanesque doorways in Leinster, I suppose O'Keefe refers to it as really the masterpiece. The Hiberno Romanesque is a distinctive style of ornamentation in Ireland. It has animal interlace woven into the hair on the heads of the capitals. You see chevron designs on the archivolts, the use of the pediments above the arch, and there's zoomorphic depictions and depictions of kind of from medieval bistries and manuscripts. The doorway is described by Lord Walter Fitzgerald in 1910 as follows. The western doorway is one of the best specimens in Ireland of the Hiberno Romanesque art. It is of 4 orders and elaborately carved with a great variety of patterns, the second arch being ornamented with representations of animals and birds, while the keystone of the outer arch consists of a human head in relief, its moustache and beard being arranged in peculiar curled locks. Each of the 8 pillars is topped by a human head, some clean shaven, others with twisted moustaches and curled beards and whiskers. The hair over the brow is in some cases waved, and in others fringed with curls intertwined. So, as I was saying, it contains zoomorphic and vegetal motifs, along with chevrons, human head carvings, and they create a vivid interplay on the beholden eye. The portal exhibits themes found in the medieval bistries from the time, which include depictions of a human-headed lion, a manticore, which is another kind of a medieval depiction of a half man, half animal, a griffin, a dragon, a possible wolf, hounds, hares, similar to what would have been found on insular manuscripts, such as the Book of Leinster at the time. The masons used both sandstone and granite to execute these carvings, and O'Keefe suggests that they may have been painted in the fashion of the illuminated manuscripts. We just go to the next slide there, please. So again, we'll just have a look on the doorway here again. So just bear with me a second. Okay, so again, there's, I suppose you could say there's 12 apostles feature here on the doorway. If you see on the capitals there, just below the arch, the capitals of the pillars there, there's 5 heads on either side there. Which is 5 and 5 is 10, obviously. And above that, then the keystone, then you'll see in the top of the arch is a keystone with St. Peter depicted there. And on the very bottom at foot level, we also see another depiction of a kind of a not so happy person at ground level. So I'll just read a little of the notes here. So in total, we have 10 carved heads located on the capitals on both sides of the doorway. Carved head said to represent St. Peter is located above the doorway, positioned at the keystone, ironically or perfectly placed for the saint, believed to possess the keys of heaven. A badly weathered, rather dour-looking face, Judas, is carved on a granite block, which is located above the plinth on the southern jamb at foot height, a position believed to be a mark of disrespect, according to earlier sources. So I think the next couple of slides are pictures just which I took, so you can just click onto those. The next one on it. Thanks, John. So I know it's not a great image now, but it seems to depict maybe some kind of an animal, possibly a deer maybe, or I'm not quite sure, but it's just an example of some of the zoomorphic motifs that we find here at Killeshin. And on the next slide, again, I think this one depicts the half lion, half man, which again will be a feature of medieval bestials at the time. I'm not sure whether it was done for comic relief or what the mentality was. You also see the use of the chevron there as well, and the chevron, of course, was a medieval symbol of the roof of heaven. So that's heavily implied as Killeshin as well. And the next slide then, John. And again, we have some chevron images here, possibly a dragon or something there as well on the right picture. And then we can see some kind of interlacing zoomorphic animal representation there on one of the columns, the outer column of the doorway. We'll just go to the next slide then, John. Great. So I just talk very briefly about the church then, I suppose. The north wall contains a Romanesque 12th century window, as does the western facade towards the top of the gable. The south wall is partial and is recorded by O'Donovan in 1838 that it was pulled down approximately 50 years beforehand. A 15th century double OG window is located in the east chancel wall. It's located in the east chancel wall. Let's see, sorry, I just lost something there. Yeah, and shows that the church was likely in use up to that period. So I just have a picture on the side of this slide there, and that shows the 15th century window as opposed to the 12th century Romanesque doorway. So different styles. Of course, that's Gothic as well. O'Keefe, Crawford, and Lees suggest that the doorway, the Romanesque doorway, may have been rebuilt or remodeled around this time in the 15th century. I'm not going to go into exactly the reasons behind that, but you can read up on it if you like. I suppose obvious features, maybe the keystone of St. Peter over the arch is slightly off centre. A number of the supporting arch columns also appear to be replaced. So it may have been reconstructed, it may have fallen into disrepair perhaps, and it was reconstructed in the 15th century. I mean, that could kind of coincide maybe with the Gaelic revival, maybe. When the Anglo-Normans came to town, maybe the church may have been abandoned. It's hard to tell for sure. So with the arrival of the Anglo-Normans into the area in the 1170s, an Anglo-Norman knight called Walter de Riddlesford was granted the cantrip of O'Boy, and this was kind of a new system of dividing the land by the Anglo-Normans. So the old Irish kind of systems, although in some places they were kept, some of them were enlarged, some of them were contracted and things like that. So the cantrip of O'Boy was basically granted to Walter de Riddlesford by Strongbow after Dermot had died. It was likely that de Riddlesford built the motte or earthen castle we see at Killeshin as a marcher outpost along the hostile frontier with the Kingdom of Ossory. As we mentioned earlier, the Kingdom of Ossory, the borders are only 9 kilometers to the west of Killeshin. And of course, Ossory was one of the famous kingdoms that really put up a fight against the Anglo-Normans in the 1180s, 1190s. So it would have made sense to erect a castle, at Killeshin, close to the border. The motte may have been a conversion of a large ring fort from the earlier medieval period associated with the Church of Killeshin. However, only archaeological excavations can shed some light on this. Now, in a lot of church sites, we see large ring forts and sometimes being reused again by the Anglo-Normans to build the earthen castles. The power base at the cantrip of Oboy shifted from Killeshin to a place called Castletown. It's not the Castletown near Mount Drat now, it's a different Castletown 10 kilometers northwest of Killeshin. And it's believed, kind of, I suppose, that the settlement of Killeshin, I mean, if you just remember back, maybe there were 700 prisoners taken from Killeshin in 1041. So, I mean, 100 years later, 150 years later, the settlement at Killeshin seems to have shifted over towards Castletown, as Diarmuid built a castle there, a much more substantial structure than at Killeshin. And it seems maybe that Killeshin may have went into kind of a decline at this period. So Killeshin is depicted on the cotton map of Laois from 1563, showing a number of buildings which appear to show maybe a small village and maybe the ruins of some ecclesiastical structures. The ecclesiastic records from the same period record that the church was ruinous, but the lands were not waste. But by 1601, the O'Moore rebellion, the lands around Killeshin were torched by Elizabethan soldiers during the harvest period in their quest to hunt down the last of the great O'Moore chieftains, Oni MacRory O'Moore, whose head is believed to be buried in a hill in the hills of Slieve Margy above Killeshin, as his dying wish was for his head not to be placed on a spike at Dublin Castle. So gruesome times, gruesome histories. We'll just move on to the next slide there, John, if you don't mind. So this is a nice elevated drone shot of Killeshin again. And thanks to Turlough O'Brien for sending me this probably 2 years ago or so. So what you can see is obviously the Romanesque doorway there in the western facade. And you can see the wall is almost completely broken all the way down to the eastern chancel area of the church with its double OG windows there. You can't see the northern wall there, which is fairly intact, but again, it's broken down towards the eastern section. The next slide, please. This is the kind of fairly iconic enough kind of photograph from Killeshin. You can see this directly across in the field at the Church of Killeshin there. It's an Anglo-Norman motte or so it's recorded as. And this is the motte then that the Diarmuid would have built when the Anglo-Normans came into the area in the 1170s and 1180s. Next slide. So we have a kind of a rounded or oval baptismal granite baptismal font with a slight incision around the center on the outside. It's a kind of maybe a decoration or so. The same type of baptismal font is found over at Sleety as well, and there are a number of these granite ones in the kind of East Laois kind of Carlow area. Of course, granite being the Carlow stone, the Wicklow mountain stone as well. So it's nice to see the use of sandstone and Carlow in the church. We go to the next slide then. I'm just conscious of the time now. So we have the 1563 cotton map of the Carlow area. Carlow Killeshin area. So you see here, this was the plantation map that New English settlers used when they were coming to take up new holdings, if you like, in Laois. So you can see the town of Carlow, the barrow there, and Killahide there is basically where Killeshin is, and just beyond that there you see the River Flourishes coming from the mountains, and some buildings associated with Killeshin. Again, we see the rather large Killeshin parish from the 1650s down survey map.
On live.
Okay, and we go to the next slide, please. So yeah, I was speaking just briefly. I just mentioned the Round Tower. Unfortunately, it's not at Killeshin anymore. The Round Tower would have been some feature for Killeshin. Killeshin has many features, you know, with the doorway and the moss and the mass rock there and a few other things. But I mean, it would have been great to have the Round Tower there as well. So, like many important early Christian houses, Killeshin had its bell tower or Clogchock, as it was called in Ireland. In Irish, it was said to be 105 feet tall, which would make it one of the largest, one of the tallest round towers in Ireland. And in 1703, Captain Wolsey, who was a local landowner, it seems, in the area, employed his agent, one called Bairrche, to demolish the tower because he was afraid that it would fall on his cattle, believe it or not. So on the 8th of March, it was recorded at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Yea steeple fell to Yea ground, and it took 3 days to complete this. I'm not sure exactly how it took 3 days to complete, but that's what they say in the references. The site was visited in 1708 by Molyneux, and he records parts of the village of Killeshin being constructed from some of the material from the Round Tower. I suppose rock, of course, would have been quite valuable for construction material anyway. And also on the enclosed cemetery wall at Killeshin, we can see in the next picture, it was constructed by James Fitzgerald, and there's a little prayer for him there. Pray for James Fitzgerald, who built this wall and planted the trees in 1787. But I just look up a couple of pictures here as well. There's very large blocks of sandstone here in the walls of the cemetery, and it's likely that these stones may have come from the Round Tower. Again, you'll see large blocks here.
A reeb.
Large blocks here in the walls surrounding the cemetery. And just the next slide, we're near the end now. So I suppose potential ways to interpret the site at Killeshin. I suppose a kind of a new technique that's on the scene now at the moment is 3D modelling of churches and monastic sites and
talk back.
Various artifacts, etc. So it would be
talk
nice.
Back, I said.
It would be nice to maybe employ the 3D modelling at Killeshin as well. Also, you know, you might show up some images which you can't see with the naked eye. So the Laois Heritage Society actually applied for funding through the National Heritage Council this year for funding for a 3D project at Killeshin and at Timahoe and at Clonina as well. So hopefully, fingers crossed, we might hear a word back on that soon if we're granted funding or not. I would just go to the next slide, please, John. Just near the end now.
Apologies for that, Sean. We've got someone.
That's okay. We're near the end anyway. Somebody's enjoying themselves out there anyway. So that's just some references I used. You know, if anybody wants a copy of the presentation or whatever, just give me a shout. I'll send it over to you if you need some references or whatever. And I suppose the last slide then, John. Thanks for listening. Questions are welcome. And just again, I'd like to thank the Laois Heritage Society, Carlow Historical and Archaeological Society, and of course, Laois Archaeology, which I kind of run myself anyway. So questions are welcome. Thank you.
Done speaking.
If anybody would like to, if you please mute your microphones. If anyone would like to ask a question, will you please come through the chat function? There's a chat function there. I'm going to send a message and you can reply to it. So any questions, just type them up in the chat and we'll ask Sean. Black and McDonough says, fascinating talk. Thank you very much. Thanks, Sean, for such a great presentation.
That's great. Thanks very much. Thank you, Bianca. I'm happy you enjoyed it anyway. The date of the last burial in the cemetery, I think I seen a reference to it. I think it's the oldest tombstone that's there is 1688 anyway, and that was recorded by Walter Fitzgerald in 1910. So I haven't seen the 1688 one myself, but that's the oldest one that's there. Anyway.
Sean, if I could just come in there, Mike Dermody, who's on Facebook, he's one of the few people we got on Facebook because we had a technical problem tonight.
Yeah.
Mike is asking, he says, limestone and granite are local stone. Where did the sandstone come from?
It's a good question. Now, I'm not a geologist or anything, but I know that there is sandstone deposits for sure in the Slieve Bloom Mountains anyway. But I think there may be sandstone deposits and kind of shell deposits down possibly in the in the Slieve Margie as well, but I don't know. It could have come from the Slieve Bloom Mountains, like, but likely did. I mean, you could do a test on it to be definitive. There's a special kind of petrographic test, they call it, and it'll tell you the source of the rocks. But most likely from Laois anyway. The granite didn't come from Laois. Came from Carlow or Wicklow. So again, it's another fine example of how Carlow and Laois people come together and do these kind of things.
Thanks, Sean. There's a few comments there. Kathleen, love a copy of the talk. Kathleen, we'll have it up on the Chaz Facebook page or the Chaz YouTube page, and I think on the Laois YouTube page as well. Probably be sometime tomorrow we'll get that. There's another comment there, 1 second now. A few more compliments. Bernie Moore and Carl Murphy and Sean Byrne, very complimentary of the talk. Michael Moriarty has an observation about the name of Killeshin, and I'm going to ask Michael to actually come on the microphone because it's probably it'll probably be too hard to type it. Michael, you come in there now if you want.
Great.
Thanks very much, and Sean, that was marvelous. I really enjoyed it. I just want to talk about when I was principal of the school way back in the 1980s in Killeshin, and I did some work on the origin of the name, and it's definitively Laois. And it's referenced. Ishin, as you correctly said, was the son of Finn McCool, who was reared in Slieve Margie in that area. Pope Innocent III back in the 12th century, when he was setting out the boundaries of the Sea of Loughlin, called it Laois. I just happen to have it here. The filler of Incus commemorate talks about Diarmuid, the rector, a sure flame, bright son of Laois. The Lower Brack records the same man as living in Laois before Cogan. There's more here. The methodology of Donegal refers to Aegon of Laois. I can give you all this. You probably have it anyway. But in 1017, then there's a reference in the monastic Hibernicum of the rector of Laois. His name was Crain Cogach. And so on and so forth. There's a few more references there as well of 1024, the methodology of Tala references the slaughter that you mentioned of the Munster men in Laois. And the Annals of Ulster in 1042 mentioned Laois, destruction of Laois. And the Annals of the Four Masters in 1077 recorded Laois with its yew trees was burned. So definitively all through the Middle Ages, it's referred to as Laois. And I know how people think it was Killeshin, but all those early texts certainly referred to Laois. And from Ishin the Bard, the son of Finn McCool, who was born on Temmer Marge in this locality and was fostered here by his aunt bubble Benson the Drew Dice. So that's who the Diocese of Kildare and Loughborough. So that's my contribution.
That's really interesting, Michael, actually, yeah. And thanks for pointing that out. Sometimes, when you see the kill bit, you get sucked into it, with the church and that kind of thing.
I share that with you. I can, it's a bit marked, it's a bit old, but I'll share it with you for your papers if you want us. Okay.
Yeah, that'd be great. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. That's excellent.
Yeah.
Maybe you could write it up and we could put it as an article in both our journals.
Well, I was that's why I had dug it out. It didn't just happen on my desk. I found this, and I intended doing that. But after looking at Sean, I feel I'm a Division 4 up against the Premier Division.
Oh, I doubt that, Michael.
Nice,
I consider it.
Nice, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Have we anybody else with questions, please? Before we wrap up.
John, if I come in here, Project Julia here.
Yeah.
Very well done, Sean. I really enjoyed that on Killeshin. I suppose with me when I was small, it was kind of the adventure playground was Killeshin up to Rossmore, where I had relations. But I think from a general point of view, I think everyone enjoyed that. Just on the point of both Laois Heritage and Carlow Historical Society, both publish historical journals, and if there are people as in we're talking about Michael there, what he had, if there are articles out there, both of us would be delighted to get contributions for our separate journals, so we can publish articles on the history of Carlow and its surrounding area, and in Laois the history of Laois and their surrounding areas. And yes, there is overlap on the borders, and we know that, and it's sort of we look across the county boundaries and sort of marvel sometimes at what goes on in the others, but it's great to have the collaboration. Sean, on a personal note, thank you very much. It was very, very enjoyable. And again, I would appeal to people, if you have an interest in history, if you have an interest in anything to do with historical matters, please support your local societies. We can really do with the help. We can really do with the funds. It's been a strange year for us all. We've had to morph into online, but look, support your local history societies. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Patrick. I'll let Sean have the final word, but just before that, can I just apologise to anybody listening? We had a big technical hiccup about 1 minute before we were getting ready to go, and it sort of messed up our plans to put stuff on Facebook, so I apologise for that. And the final thing for me, sorry, this is John Kelly from the Carlow Society, and Sean is interested in this as well. If anybody, seeing as you've got a cross-border group on tonight, if anybody has any information about the famous whale in Mara Park in Great Cullen in 1957, we're scouring to try to get a picture of it. So if anybody knows anybody who made a picture of that, if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you'll have to wait for the article. Thanks very much, everybody. Over to you, Sean.
That's great. Thanks very much, Sean. And let's hope for our elusive whale shows up in a photograph. But no, thanks everybody for listening in. I mean, Killeshin is really one of the great sites in County Laois. Its connection there with the Ubriacks, Carlow, Diarmuid Mac Murchadha, it's a great site, and it'd be nice to see maybe a little bit more kind of tourism and a little bit more highlighted of the area going forward. But I suppose it's a work in progress, and we get to that. So just to say thanks to everybody, and appreciate you listening in on the call tonight. Thank you.